The winter wind was unforgiving that night, whipping sideways in sharp, stabbing flurries that cut across the barren landscape like icy needles. Snowflakes didn't simply fall, they attacked, slicing through the air, swirling violently under. The pale glow of a broken street lamp. It coated the remote gas station on Route 41 with a thick, relentless blanket of cold. The silence was heavy and unnatural, pressing down like a warning. Not the calm before a storm, but the stillness of something fragile on the brink of breaking. Silas Danner gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck, knuckles white beneath his worn gloves. His breath clouded the windshield in quick puffs. As he shifted the vehicle into park, the engine idling low in the biting cold. Beside him, his son Rowan sat hunched in the passenger seat, cocooned in a threadbare coat that had seen better days. Rowan's face was turned toward the window, but his eyes were vacant, distant and unseeing for 3 long years. Since the accident, since the light had vanished from his world, silence had become his language. Silas swallowed hard, heart heavy beneath his rugged exterior. He reached out across the narrow space, flicking the heat dial higher without a word. "Won't be long," he murmured, not really expecting a response. Rowan didn't speak anymore. Not since that day. Not since the life had slipped through their fingers like smoke. Just as Silas reached for the door handle, a subtle motion caught his eye. A shift in the frozen tableau beyond the truck's windshield. At the edge of the gas station lot, a rusty pickup screeched to a halt, tires spinning against ice-slick pavement. The driver's side door swung open with a sharp creak, and a woman stepped out. She was thin, weathered by years of hardship, her hair tangled and wild beneath a faded beanie pulled low against the cold. Smoke curled from the cigarette she held loosely between trembling fingers, a fragile thread of defiance in a broken world. Her face was drawn and tired, the kind of weariness that comes from carrying invisible burdens for far too long. From the back seat of her truck, she reached in and pulled out 2 small figures. Twins, a boy and a girl no older than 8. Their clothes hung loosely, threadbare and soaked, too thin for the harsh winter night. Their small bodies shivered violently as they were lifted from the truck, their eyes wide and filled with confusion, fear, and the unbearable weight of abandonment. The woman's steps faltered as she carried them toward the edge of the lot, but she pressed forward, leaving the children behind like forgotten luggage in the snow. She lingered for a moment, cigarette smoke twisting around her like a last farewell, before turning and climbing back into her truck. The engine roared to life, spinning tires and leaving tracks in the fresh powder as she disappeared down the empty road. The 2 children stood there, small and alone, surrounded by nothing but the cold and the distant hum of a lonely highway. The snow swirled around them, settling like a shroud, muffling the world into a ghostly quiet. Their breaths came in visible puffs, fingers clutching tightly to each other's coats. Silas watched, breath caught in his throat. He didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he opened his door and stepped out into the freezing night. The wind bit at his face like a living thing, but his eyes stayed locked on the two trembling children. His voice was low, soft enough not to startle, yet steady and sure. "Hey!" he called. The children flinched, eyes darting nervously toward him. "Come here." Silas beckoned gently, pulling his coat tighter. "It's cold out here." The geek boy's lip quivered. The girl clung harder to her brother's hand, the bond between them a fragile lifeline. Silas knelt in the snow, opening his arms like a harbor in the storm. "You're safe now." Rowan stirred beside him in the truck, his empty gaze flickering for the briefest moment, as if sensing something shifting in the air. But Silas didn't take his eyes off the children. There was no hesitation in his heart, only a fierce, quiet resolve. Tonight wasn't about questions or plans. It was about kindness, about a single man's willingness to see what others refused to. As the snow swirled around them in restless currents, Silas wrapped his coat around the twins, pulling them close against the biting cold. And in that frozen silence, a spark was lit. The bitter wind cut through Silas's coat as he stood beside the two children, their small bodies trembling against the unforgiving cold. The snow continued to swirl like restless ghosts, but Silas's breath was steady, calm, determined. His rugged hands moved gently to tuck the threadbare jacket collars higher, sheltering the twins from the relentless chill. Behind him, the woman, the stepmother, hesitated near the edge of the gas station lot. Her eyes flicked toward Silas, sharp and wary, flickering with something unreadable. She was a shadow herself, worn thin by years of hard choices and broken promises. Her lips parted, words struggling to escape, but the cold cracked her voice before she could speak. "I can't," she whispered, her voice brittle like old leather, fragile as a leaf in a storm. The cigarette between her fingers burned low, smoke curling upward like a fading memory. She turned away abruptly, shoving the door shut with a clang that echoed through the empty night. But Silas was already moving. He crossed the lot in long, purposeful strides, the crunch of his boots muffled beneath the snow's thick carpet. Kneeling, he lowered himself to the children's level, meeting their wide, frightened eyes with a softness he rarely let show. "Hey there," he said gently, voice low and steady like a promise. "I'm Silas. You're safe now." The boy's lower lip trembled, a tear tracing a silent path through the grime on his cheek. The girl clung to his hand, small fingers gripping tightly, as if afraid to let go. They looked cold, hungry for warmth, for something they hadn't known in a long time. Silas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn woolen scarf, unraveling it carefully. "Here," he said, wrapping it around the boy's neck. Then, with the same care, he draped it over the girl's shoulders. Their shivers slowed, replaced by a fragile stillness. Rowan shifted in the truck beside him, lifting his head just enough to glance toward the scene. Silas caught the movement and offered a faint nod. His son's eyes held a flicker, a whisper of recognition. The silence between Rowan and the twins was thick, but not empty. Something unspoken passed in that moment, a fragile bond forged, not in words, but in shared pain and survival. The woman in the beanie lit another cigarette, smoke drifting into the night like a curtain. She took a step back, hands shaking, lips trembling as she stared at the children she had left behind. "Why?" Silas's voice cracked the silence. Her eyes flickered with anger and shame. "They're better off without me. I can't give them what they need." Silas's jaw clenched. "Everyone deserves someone who fights for them. Even you." She shook her head, tears welling beneath the heavy curtain of her hair. "I'm not the person they need." Silas rose, his frame casting a long shadow beneath the flickering gas station sign. "Maybe not, but I am." The woman's eyes hardened, but she said nothing more. The truck's engine rumbled as she pulled away, leaving the siblings wrapped in Silas's worn coat and the biting silence of the winter night. Silas looked down at the children, their faces pale but unbroken. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He opened the passenger door and gently lifted the girl into the truck, then the boy. Their small bodies pressed close, searching for comfort in the shared space. As he started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, Silas glanced in the rearview mirror. The snowflakes danced like silver ghosts in the headlights, but the twins' eyes were fixed on the warmth inside the truck, on the man who had chosen to see them, to hold them, to fight for them. Rowan sat quietly beside Silas, the weight of his silence suddenly lighter, as if a new chapter was beginning, not just for the twins, but for the family they were becoming. The old house Silas called home stood quietly on the edge of town, its paint chipped and faded from years of harsh weather and quieter days. The porch sagged slightly, the creaking boards a familiar soundtrack for Silas's life. Rough around the edges, but sturdy enough to hold what mattered. As the rusty truck pulled into the driveway, the twins huddled closer together in the back seat, their eyes wide and wary. Silas reached back, gently patting their hands with a reassurance that felt more like a lifeline than a promise. "Almost home," he said softly. Inside, the warmth of the cracked wood stove pushed back the cold, wrapping the rooms in a gentle amber glow. The scent of old pine and worn leather mixed with the faint lingering trace of smoke from the chimney. It was humble and simple, nothing like the polished lives they might have imagined, but it was safe. Silas opened the door, and the twins hesitated. Their small hands gripped the edges of the seats, unsure of this new world that smelled of dust and history. "Come on," Silas encouraged, stepping out and stretching. "It's okay here." The boy climbed out first, rubbing his frozen fingers on his sleeves. The girl followed, her steps tentative, eyes scanning every shadow. Like a frightened animal, Silas guided them inside, offering gentle words and a quiet smile. The fire crackled in the hearth as Silas fetched blankets and mugs of warm milk, setting them before the children who clung to each other like lifelines. "Eat," he said softly. "You'll need your strength." They ate in silence at first, their faces pale but alive, the warmth slowly melting the iciness left by the world outside. Silas watched Rowan from across the room, his son sitting quietly in a worn armchair, eyes shadowed but curious. Rowan's silence was a fortress built from years of loss and pain, but tonight something shifted. His gaze lifted from the cracked floor to the twins, and he blinked, as if seeing beyond the surface for the first time. The boy noticed first. His eyes met Rowan's, and a hesitant smile cracked the edge of his lips, a fragile bridge across the gulf of silence. Silas caught the moment, a surge of hope stirring in his chest. Here, in this small, battered house, something new was beginning. That night, as the twins huddled beneath warm blankets, their breathing steady and calm, Silas sat by the fire, staring into the dancing flames. His hands were rough and calloused, yet tender as they traced invisible patterns in the air. The weight of the day pressed on him, but so did a growing resolve. He would protect these children, not because it was easy or even expected, but because his heart demanded it. In the quiet stillness, Rowan finally spoke, a soft, cracked whisper that broke through the long silence. "I like them," he said, eyes still downcast. Silas turned sharply, heart pounding. "What was that, son?" Rowan's gaze flickered up, meeting his father's for the first time in years. "I like them," he repeated, voice steadier. "They're okay." Tears welled in Silas's eyes, tears he swallowed quickly, not ready to fall. This small step, this whisper in the dark, was a victory, and it was only the beginning. The dawn was gray and heavy, pressing cold against the windows of Silas's small house. The fire sputtered low in the hearth, barely warming the room where the children still slept, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of cedar and hope. Silas was stirring the morning coffee when the knock came. Sharp, insistent, slicing through the fragile calm like a blade. He wiped his hands on his worn work shirt and opened the door. Standing there was a woman who seemed to carry winter with her. Tall, rigid, her expensive coat buttoned up tight against the chill. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the house like a general surveying a battlefield. "You have them," she said flatly, her voice clipped and commanding. Silas's jaw tightened. "They're safe here." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, heels clicking sharply on the floorboards. "They belong with me," she declared, her tone laced with steel, the ruthless authority of someone used to getting. Her way. Silas stood firm, planting himself between her and the children's rooms. "They're safer here," he said quietly, but without hesitation. Her gaze flicked to the twins, who had woken and peeked from behind the doorway, eyes wide and frightened. The woman's lips curled into a cold smile. "You think you can keep them? Do you know what's at stake?" Silas's heart pounded. He recognized the fight in her, the same fight that haunted his own past, the fight for control and power, the fight that threatened to crush anyone in its path. "Who are you?" he asked, voice steady despite the tension rising between them. "I'm their stepmother," she said, with a cruel edge, "and I have every right to take them back." Silas swallowed, memories flashing, the phone calls filled with threats, the whispered rumors in town, the slick lawyers and cold judges ready to tip the scales. But this was more than legal battles. It was a war of pride, wealth, and ruthless manipulation. "I'm not letting you hurt them again," Silas said, stepping forward. The woman's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what they're worth, or what they could lose." He shook his head slowly. "I know what they need. Love, safety, a chance." Her face twisted with scorn. "Love? That's a luxury for people who can afford it." The words stung, but Silas refused to back down. "Maybe," he said softly, "but it's a kind of power you'll never understand." The moment stretched, the silence filled with the weight of unspoken histories, of abuse hidden behind silk curtains, of secrets kept in cold mansions, of children trapped between worlds they didn't belong to. Suddenly, the twins stepped forward, their small hands clutching each other tightly. "We want to stay," the boy said quietly, voice steady despite the fear. The woman's gaze flicked between them and Silas, and for a heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes. Doubt? Regret? Or just cold calculation masked by a mother's mask? "I'll see you in court," she said finally, turning sharply and exiting with the harsh click of her heels. Silas closed the door slowly behind her, his breath shaky but determined. The battle had begun, not just for custody, but for the very souls of the children he'd sworn to protect. The house was still on the outside, but inside something was beginning to stir. Quiet, fragile, yet undeniable. The twins moved cautiously at first, like tentative shoots breaking through a frozen earth. Their eyes, wide and wary, watched everything. Silas, Rowan, the worn furniture, as if measuring the safety in each shadow. Rowan remained silent, as he had for 3 long years, but the invisible barrier between the children began to soften in small ways. One afternoon, the backyard dusted with a thin layer of frost, Silas sat on the cracked porch steps, watching Rowan and the boy toss a battered baseball back and forth. Rowan's hands were stiff and his throws awkward, but he didn't pull away. The twins giggled at the misses, the girls' laughter a delicate bell that rippled through the cold air, warming even the hardened heart watching from the porch. Inside the house, the girl found solace in drawing. Her small hands moved quickly, sketching worlds where fear didn't exist. Castles, forests, and bright, sunlit meadows. Silas often found her in the quiet corners, pencil in hand, her eyes focused, a small smile playing on her lips. Rowan's silence wasn't broken easily, but slowly it cracked. One evening, as Silas tucked the twins into bed, Rowan lingered near the doorway, his eyes flickering toward the sleeping children. Silas caught his son's gaze and held it steady. Without a word, Rowan stepped forward, voice cracking like ice, breaking on a frozen lake. "Throw," he whispered. It was the first sound Silas had heard from his son in years. Silas's heart leapt, tears prickling at the edges of his eyes. The house, once heavy with grief and silence, was humming with tentative hope. Meals became moments of connection. Simple dinners where laughter slowly edged into the quiet. Homework sessions were no longer solitary struggles, but shared triumphs. Nights ended with stories, whispered promises, and gentle reassurances that they were safe. All of them. In the fragile warmth of this new family, broken pieces began to fit together. Yet, as the bonds deepened, so too did the storm gathering outside. The warmth inside the house was a fragile flame, flickering against the howling wind outside. But it wasn't just the weather that was cold. It was the gathering storm beyond their doorstep. Silas felt it first in the form of ominous letters, slipped beneath the door, their typewritten threats laced with legal jargon and warnings that chilled more than the winter air. The stepmother's lawyers were relentless, their words sharp and unforgiving. Reclaim the children, or face consequences. One morning, as Silas prepared breakfast, a knock echoed through the small house. He opened the door to find a man with a stern face and a briefcase, a hired investigator sent to shadow his every move. "You're making a mistake," the man said, voice low and firm. "They have the means to make this very difficult for you." Silas's jaw clenched. "I'm not backing down." Outside, rumors began to swirl. Whispers in the grocery store, sideways glances at the school, questioning his fitness, his past mistakes, his worthiness to care for the children. It was a battle not just fought in courtrooms, but in the hushed voices of a community divided by class and fear. But Silas was not alone. Neighbors who had once nodded politely now crossed the street to offer a helping hand. Mrs. Thompson, the kindly schoolteacher, brought over extra coats and blankets for the twins. Pastor Jim, a pillar of the town, preached sermons about kindness and standing for the vulnerable. The local grocery clerk shared stories of Silas's generosity, how he'd paid for groceries when others went short, how his hands were rough from honest work, but tender in caring. Slowly, the walls of isolation began to crumble. Community meetings were called, quietly at first, but growing in strength. Letters were sent to the court, signed by those who had witnessed Silas's dedication. Through it all, Silas remained a rock, his silence steady, his resolve unshaken. Yet beneath his calm, the weight pressed heavy. The fear of losing the children, the struggle to shield Rowan and the twins from the world's cruelty, and the aching reminder that their safety was never guaranteed. One evening, as Silas sat on the porch watching the snow fall, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Help is coming," it read. A lifeline or a trap? Silas's eyes narrowed as he stared into the dark night, wondering who or what lay waiting on the other side. The message lingered in Silas's mind like a fragile thread, a whispered promise amid the storm. He didn't know who had sent it, only that it had come at the right moment, when hope felt like a distant star. A few days later, he found himself standing outside a sleek office building in the heart of town. The glass facade reflected the pale winter sun, towering over the modest houses he knew so well. He felt out of place, a rugged man used to the soil and sweat of honest work. But something drew him forward. The receptionist buzzed him in, and he was led into a private conference room where a woman waited. She was impeccably dressed, her presence commanding, yet calm. Her eyes held a quiet strength that made Silas feel both scrutinized and understood. "Silas Danner," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Eleanor Vaughn." He shook it, feeling the firmness of her grip, the kind of grip that could hold worlds together or tear them apart. Eleanor was a successful CEO of a philanthropic foundation focused on social justice. But what Silas didn't know was that beneath her polished exterior lay a story just as battered and scarred as his own. "I've been following your situation," she said, her voice steady. "What you're facing isn't just a family matter. It's a battle against a system designed to protect the privileged." Silas listened, wary but intrigued. "We have resources, legal experts, media connections, community organizers. More importantly, we have a network willing to stand with you." A flicker of hope stirred in his chest. Over the following weeks, Eleanor became a constant presence in Silas's life. Meetings were arranged, plans laid out, legal strategies were crafted to expose the stepmother's abuses and unravel the web of deceit she'd spun. But beyond the fight for custody, something more complicated blossomed between Silas and Eleanor. In quiet moments, away from the chaos, they shared fragments of their past, wounds and regrets, dreams deferred and shattered. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, Eleanor invited Silas to a small cafe. The soft glow of fairy lights cast a gentle shimmer over their table as they sipped coffee in companionable silence. I know what it's like to lose everything, Eleanor admitted softly, eyes distant, to feel powerless. Silas nodded, the lines around his eyes deepening. It's a kind of loneliness that no one really sees. She smiled, a fragile curve. Maybe that's why we found each other. Their hands brushed briefly across the table, a spark of something tentative and raw. Yet beneath the budding connection was a current of fear. Both had been betrayed before, their trust shattered by people they once loved. Could two broken souls find healing in one another? Or would the past's shadows pull them apart? As Eleanor walked Silas to his truck, her voice dropped to a whisper. Whatever happens, you're not alone. Silas met her gaze, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his guarded exterior. Maybe this time, I don't have to be. Behind them, the city lights blinked quietly, witnesses to a fragile alliance born in the darkest winter. The days that followed brought a subtle shift, like the first thaw of winter's grip, cautious and uncertain. Silas found himself looking forward to Eleanor's visits, those stolen moments away from legal battles and the weight of responsibility. One evening, as snowflakes drifted softly outside, Eleanor invited Silas to her home. A cozy, book-lined apartment that smelled faintly of cedar wood and old paper. The glow from a crackling fireplace painted shadows across the walls, softening the hard edges of the world outside. They settled on the worn leather sofa, cups of steaming tea warming their hands. The silence between them was not awkward, but comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. I never told many people, Eleanor began, tracing a finger along the rim of her cup. But before all this, I lost someone very close. My father. He was my anchor. And when he died, I felt like I lost my way. Silas nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her confession. I threw myself into work, into control, trying to bury the pain. But it only grew louder. His gaze softened. I know that kind of pain. I lost my wife, and then my son. He stopped speaking for years. It's like grief takes up residence in your chest. Eleanor reached out, her hand brushing his. Maybe that's why we're here, trying to heal, to find a new way forward. The touch lingered, a spark of warmth in the chill of winter. Silas swallowed hard, his walls trembling. Do you believe in second chances? She asked quietly. He looked into her eyes, vulnerable, real, and nodded. I'm starting to. Weeks passed in a slow dance of discovery. They shared dinners cooked in Eleanor's small kitchen, long walks through snow-dusted parks and quiet talks that stretched deep into the night. Yet their connection wasn't without struggle. Both carried scars, fear of loss, mistrust, and the weight of their separate battles. One rainy afternoon, as Eleanor helped Silas care for the twins, a fragile moment cracked open. The children giggled, chasing puddles, while Silas watched, a rare smile breaking through his usual stoicism. Eleanor stepped beside him, her voice gentle. "You've built something beautiful here." He looked at her, eyes dark with emotion. "It's not just me. It's all of us." Their hands found each other again, fingers entwined as if holding on to hope itself. But beneath the growing warmth, the shadow of the stepmother loomed, a constant threat, a reminder that their fragile happiness could shatter at any moment. 1. Evening after tucking the children into bed, Silas and Eleanor sat by the fire. The silence was broken only by the soft crackle of flames. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared." Silas pulled her close. "Me too. But whatever comes, we face it together." In the quiet, a promise was made. Not just of love, but of resilience, of healing against all odds, and as winter pressed on, their hearts warmed, slowly, surely, toward a future neither dared to dream before. The fragile peace of their home was shattered one rainy afternoon, when the twins, Noah and Emma, hesitated to come inside after school. Their small faces were pale, eyes darting nervously as they clung to each other. Silas knelt down in the muddy driveway, brushing wet hair from Emma's forehead. "What's wrong, kids?" Noah's voice trembled. "Mom left us something. A diary. She said we had to be careful." Silas exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who had quietly stepped out to join them, her expression tightening with concern. Inside the warm kitchen, the children unfolded a worn, leather-bound notebook, edges frayed and pages yellowed with age. Emma's small hands trembled as she opened it, revealing hurried, shaky handwriting. Letters of love mixed with fear, hope intertwined with despair. Silas read the words aloud, his voice breaking as the story emerged. Their mother had been trapped, caught in a world where control wasn't just power, but danger. She had fled from the stepmother's cold grip, escaping abuse that no child should ever endure. Her letters were pleas for safety, for a future free from fear. Each page unveiled a deeper darkness, revealing how close they had come to losing everything, not just home, but hope itself. Noah's eyes filled with tears. "She wanted us to be safe," Emma nodded, clutching the diary tightly. "She wanted you to protect us." Silas felt a fierce surge of protectiveness, mingled with guilt. How had he not known? How had these children suffered in silence, while he wrestled with his own pain? Eleanor reached out, her voice steady but fierce. "This changes everything. We're not just fighting for custody. We're fighting for their freedom." The weight of the truth settled over the room like a heavy fog, but beneath it glowed a spark, a shared determination to break the chains that bound them all. That night, Silas sat by the fireplace, the diary open beside him. Rowan, who had been silent for so long, approached hesitantly. He looked at the letters, then at his father. "They're brave," he whispered. Silas reached out, pulling Rowan close. "So are you." In the days that followed, the diary became a beacon, guiding their fight, strengthening their resolve. But the stepmother was not idle. She unleashed a wave of threats and intimidation, determined to reclaim control at any cost. One evening, as Silas locked the doors and peered into the darkness beyond the porch light, a shadow flickered, a reminder that their battle was far from over. And yet, amid the looming threat, a quiet miracle was beginning to take root. A family bound not by blood, but by courage, love, and an unbreakable bond. The courthouse loomed ahead like a fortress, cold, unyielding, and indifferent to the human stories hidden within its walls. Silas stood on the steps, the weight of the moment pressing down like the winter chill. His jaw was set, eyes focused, but inside a storm of fear and hope raged. Rowan clung to his hand, fingers trembling but steady. Beside them, Noah and Emma sat quietly in Eleanor's arms, their small faces pale but determined. The day they had feared was finally here. The day when strangers in black robes would decide if their family could stay together or be torn apart. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense and unforgiving. The stepmother's lawyer was relentless, a sharp-edged woman whose words cut through the silence like knives. She painted Silas as unfit, a man battling his own demons, unworthy of the children's care. "Your Honor," she said with icy precision, "these children deserve stability, not chaos. Their father's past mistakes cannot be ignored." Silas swallowed hard, but held his ground. Eleanor, by his side, met the lawyer's gaze with quiet defiance. Then came the witnesses, neighbors who spoke of Silas's kindness, teachers who had watched the children bloom under his care, and community members who stood up for the man who had given everything. The turning point came unexpectedly. Rowan, the boy who had not spoken for 3 years, rose slowly and walked to the stand. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of silence. "They're my family," he said simply. "He kept us safe." The room fell silent. Even the judge's stern eyes softened for a moment. Then Eleanor took the stand. With grace and strength, she revealed her true identity. A long-lost relative of the children, a protector who had stayed in the shadows until the time was right. She told of the abuse, the lies, and the lengths the stepmother had gone to control the children. Her testimony shattered the carefully constructed facade of power and manipulation. The courtroom buzzed with a new energy. Justice seemed possible. But the stepmother was not finished. Her final argument was a desperate plea, filled with venom and desperation. "You cannot believe everything you hear. This man is a stranger to the world they come from. Silas stood, his voice steady but fierce. I am the only home they've known, and I will fight for them until my last breath. As the judge withdrew to deliberate, the tension was unbearable. Every heart in that courtroom held its breath, waiting for a verdict that would change lives forever. Finally, the judge returned, voice calm but heavy with the weight of responsibility. Custody is granted to Mr. Danner, the judge announced, but with provisions for therapy and continued monitoring. A wave of relief and gratitude swept through the room. The children rushed to Silas, wrapping their arms around him in a silent vow of loyalty and love. Outside, the bitter cold seemed less biting, the snow less relentless. A new chapter had begun, fragile but full of promise. But as they stepped into the fading light, Silas knew this victory was only the beginning. Healing would take time. Trust would need to be rebuilt, and the shadows of the past would linger. Still, for the first time in years, he dared to hope. The courtroom's heavy oak doors had barely swung shut when Eleanor pulled Silas aside, her eyes urgent yet shimmering with something close to relief. "There's something you need to know," she whispered, voice low enough that only he could hear. Silas's brows furrowed, heart still racing from the verdict. "What is it?" Eleanor glanced toward the children, now safe in a small corner, their faces calm for the first time in weeks. "I'm family, closer than you think." Her breath caught slightly, the weight of years pressing down. "I'm their aunt, their mother's sister. I've been protecting them from the shadows." Silas staggered back slightly, the revelation hitting him like a cold wave. His mind reeled with questions, but before he could ask, Eleanor continued, "It's why I couldn't come forward sooner. The danger wasn't just from their stepmother, but from powerful people she's entangled with. I had to be careful, watch, wait." The pieces fell into place. The quiet woman who had quietly rallied neighbors, the one who had introduced herself as a business consultant, it was all part of a protective mask, a shield forged in sacrifice. Silas's respect for her deepened, not just for what she had done, but for the secret she had borne alone. Meanwhile, the twins clung to each other, their guarded eyes slowly softening as the presence of a true family member settled around them like a gentle blanket. Rowan, who had just found his voice again, looked between Silas and Eleanor with a new kind of hope shimmering in his gaze. Days melted into weeks as therapy sessions began, and the family tentatively stitched their lives together. The house, once echoing with loss and silence, filled with the small sounds of healing. Whispered words, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly, music from the old piano in the living room. Silas watched the children thrive, marveled at Rowan's growing confidence, and marveled even more at the gentle, steady bond blossoming between Eleanor and himself. Theirs was not a story of instant romance, but a slow, deliberate dance. Moments stolen between court dates and hospital visits. Glances that lingered a little too long, hands brushing and not pulling away. One evening, under the soft glow of kitchen lights, Eleanor shared a piece of her past. A life left behind, sacrifices made to protect her family. Silas listened, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug, the room heavy with unspoken understanding. "You don't have to carry it all alone anymore," he said softly. She looked up, eyes glistening. "I thought I did. But maybe I don't." Their first real kiss was gentle, hesitant, a promise, not just of love, but of partnership in a life rebuilt from the ashes. Yet beneath the warmth, the shadows lingered. The stepmother's allies still whispered threats, and the fragile peace was a battlefield waiting to erupt. One night, Silas received an anonymous message, a warning that the fight was far from over. But this time, he wasn't alone. Together, Silas and Eleanor faced the coming storm, strengthened by the unbreakable bond of family, love, and shared purpose. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains of the modest house that Silas now called home, not just a shelter from the storm, but a beacon of fresh beginnings. The walls, once silent and cold, echoed now with laughter, whispered secrets, and the occasional off-key hum of a new song. Silas stood in the kitchen, the aroma of brewing coffee mingling with the soft clatter of dishes, as Eleanor and the children moved through their morning routines. The twins, once shrouded in silence and fear, now danced barefoot on the wooden floor, their faces alight with the kind of joy that only safety and love could kindle. Rowan, his voice no longer a fragile whisper, but a steady melody, sat by the window reading aloud, his words carrying the promise of healing and hope. The journey had been long and painful, but here in this imperfect home, every crack was filled with resilience. Eleanor, balancing a high-powered career and newfound family, life had made the bold choice to step back from the relentless corporate world. Her office, once a shrine to ambition, had been transformed into a cozy space for music lessons and art projects. She smiled softly, watching the children gather around the piano, their eager fingers exploring keys once foreign, but now a source of wonder. Silas felt a quiet pride rising within him, tempered by the scars of battles fought. His rough hands, calloused from years of labor and loss, now tenderly helped the children tie their shoelaces, bandage scraped knees, and navigate the complex world of trust and love. Their evenings became rituals, shared meals filled with stories, plans whispered beneath warm blankets, and the steady beat of a family learning to be whole. In this house, kindness was currency. Forgiveness was foundation. Every day was a chance to rewrite the future. One afternoon, Eleanor brought home a stack of notebooks, journals filled with poems, songs, and drawings from children in the community. Inspired by the story unfolding in her own home, she had launched a project, a sanctuary for other children like theirs, a place where voices silenced by fear could sing freely. Silas listened as Eleanor shared her vision over dinner, her eyes bright with hope. It's not just about saving them from the past, she said. It's about giving them a future worth dreaming. The children crowded around, eager to hear more, their laughter filling the room like music. As the seasons changed, so did their home. The garden bloomed under Eleanor's careful hands. The walls wore new colors, and the air was alive with possibility. But beneath the blossoming joy, Silas kept one eye on the horizon. The past, with its tangled webs and shadows, was never far away. Yet for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever came with the strength of a family, bound not by blood, alone but by courage, love, and unyielding hope. The night sky stretched endlessly above the quiet backyard, stars flickering like distant promises. Silas and Eleanor sat side by side on the weathered porch swing, their hands intertwined, the gentle creak of the swing mingling with the soft rustle of leaves. The world felt fragile, a delicate balance of shadows and light. Yet in this moment, it was theirs alone. Silas's calloused fingers brushed a loose strand of Eleanor's hair behind her ear, his touch both tentative and sure. They had built something neither had dared hope for, a fragile mosaic of trust, healing, and unexpected love. The weight of their pasts still lingered, but it no longer defined them. Instead, it was the foundation on which they stood. Eleanor's eyes glistened as she looked up at the stars. "I never thought I'd find this again," she whispered. "After everything, the pain, the losses, I thought love was a closed door." Silas's voice was low but steady. "It's funny how the darkest nights can lead us to the brightest dawns." They shared a smile, the kind that held years of unspoken understanding. "You saved more than just those kids, Silas," Eleanor said softly. "You saved me." His heart tightened at her words. We saved each other. Between them, the space was filled with the quiet music of possibility. The children's laughter drifted from the open window, a symphony of hope that echoed their own journey. As the cool breeze swept across the porch, Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, a promise etched in silver and courage. "I don't have much," she said, with a smile tinged by vulnerability, "but I want to build everything with you. A life, a family, a future." Silas's eyes shimmered with emotion. "There's nothing I want more." He took the ring gently, slipping it onto her finger, as the stars bore silent witness to their vow. "Together," Eleanor breathed. "Always," Silas replied. They leaned into each other, the world fading away, leaving only the pulse of two hearts beating in time. But beneath the tenderness, an unspoken tension lingered, a reminder that love, no matter how fierce, does not erase the scars of the past. Later that night, as they stood at the edge of the porch, a shadow moved just beyond the garden fence. A figure, cloaked in darkness, watched silently, the stepmother's influence far from extinguished. Her eyes glinted with fury and resolve. The fight wasn't over. The morning sun spilled over the rooftops of the small town like a warm blessing, filtering through the trees and spilling golden light across the streets. News of Silas and Eleanor's story had spread beyond whispers and roadside gossip, sparking something unexpected, a wave of compassion and community spirit that no one, not even Silas himself, had anticipated. It started small, neighbors dropping off bags of clothes, donations quietly left on the porch, homemade meals shared without expectation. The grocery clerk from the corner store handed over extra cans of soup. The school teacher sent along stacks of books for the twins. Word traveled quickly, and soon volunteers appeared, local musicians, artists, and teachers, all drawn by the story of a man who had refused to turn away. The once quiet garage where Silas had taken in the children began to transform. Strings of lights twinkled from the rafters, casting a warm glow over walls that had long held only shadows. Folding chairs circled around a makeshift stage, and music instruments found their places against the walls. It was no longer just a shelter. It was becoming a sanctuary. Eleanor coordinated the efforts with quiet grace, her sharp mind turning chaos into order. The CEO, who had once hidden behind corporate power, was now a beacon of hope in the community. She organized fundraisers and reached out to local foundations, her influence shifting from boardrooms to backyards. The city's skeptics and cynics softened, their hearts touched by the undeniable truth of what Silas had built. A family, a home, a movement. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Silas stood before a crowd gathered in the newly christened Harmony House. Children's laughter echoed through the air, mingling with the hum of heartfelt conversations. Parents shared stories of struggle and survival, tears mingling with smiles. Silas's voice broke through the warmth, rough but steady. "This isn't just about us. It's about every child who's ever felt invisible, every family broken and forgotten. This is a place where hope lives, where second chances are real." The crowd erupted in applause, but Silas's gaze found Eleanor's in the back, her eyes shining with pride and unspoken love. Their shared journey had become a beacon, a testament to what kindness and courage could achieve. But amidst the triumph, a shadow lurked. A late-night phone call rattled Eleanor's calm, a warning that the stepmother was not finished. Her legal team was regrouping, preparing to strike back with new allegations and threats. Eleanor's jaw tightened as she ended the call. "They think this is over," she said quietly, "but it's just beginning." Silas stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "Then we'll face it. Together." In the glow of community and newfound family, they prepared for the next battle, knowing that love had given them strength, but only courage could carry them through what was yet to come. The acrid sting of smoke still clung to the air as dawn broke over the town. Flames had been quelled, but the damage to Harmony House was undeniable. The charred walls stood as a cruel reminder that the fight was far from over. Silas stood among the rubble, his rugged hands covered in soot, jaw clenched, but eyes steady. This place, their sanctuary, had been threatened, but not broken. Neighbors gathered around, their faces etched with grief and determination. Volunteers from every corner of the community arrived early, sleeves rolled up, ready to rebuild not just a building, but the hope it symbolized. The fire was meant to silence them, but instead it amplified their voices, uniting the town in fierce, protective solidarity. Silas moved through the crowd with quiet authority, accepting donations, organizing cleanup. But beneath the surface, old ghosts stirred. Memories he'd kept buried clawed their way back. Mistakes made, regrets left to fester. The pain of loss, the weight of his failures as a father and husband, pressed down harder than ever. Late at night, when the world was still, Silas confronted these demons. He stood by the window of his small home, watching the flickering streetlights. Rowan slept peacefully beside him, and the twins dreamed in the next room, but Silas couldn't rest. He whispered apologies to the shadows, promises to be better, to be present. Eleanor found him there one evening, the vulnerability rare and raw. She didn't offer solutions or platitudes, only steady presence. "We all carry the past," she said softly, "but it doesn't have to define us." Her words, gentle but firm, cut through the darkness. For the first time in years, Silas allowed himself to hope, not just for the future of the children, but for his own redemption. The stepmother's power waned as the community's outrage grew. Her attempts to sabotage Silas became increasingly desperate and transparent. Legal battles raged on, but the tide was turning. The truth, once hidden in shadows, now shone bright under the scrutiny of a united town. Rowan's voice, once lost to grief, grew stronger each day. His laughter, a rare and precious gift, filled the house. The twins thrived in the warmth of their new family, their smiles brighter than the snow that had once threatened to freeze their spirits. Silas and Eleanor worked side by side, parenting, healing, dreaming. They understood their family wasn't perfect, It bore scars and cracks, but it was real, resilient, and full of love. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Eleanor squeezed Silas's hand. "We're not just surviving," she said, her voice steady with conviction. "We're living." Silas smiled, the weight on his shoulders lighter. "And we'll keep living. For them. For us." Their eyes met, a silent promise passing between them, that whatever storms came, they would face them together. The garage, once a cold, cluttered space, now glowed warmly beneath strings of fairy lights. The wooden floorboards creaked softly under the feet of the family gathered there. Silas, Eleanor, Rowan, and the twins, their faces radiant with a mixture of joy and quiet triumph. Music filled the air like a balm, weaving through the room, stitching together wounds old and new. Tonight wasn't about performance or applause. It was about something far deeper, the healing power of togetherness, the unspoken promise of a future forged from love and resilience. The piano's worn keys sang beneath Eleanor's fingertips, the melody both familiar and new, as Rowan strummed a guitar with tentative but growing confidence. The twins, once silent and scared, found their voices in song, their harmonies rising, like a sunrise breaking through years of darkness. Silas's gravelly voice joined theirs, strong and steady, carrying the weight of every battle fought and every victory won. His eyes never left Eleanor's, a silent thank you for the strength she brought to this fragile family. Their hands brushed, a spark, a promise. And in that touch, the years of pain melted into something beautiful and new. The song they sang was more than melody and words. It was a testament, a declaration that no matter how shattered the past, the pieces could be joined to create a masterpiece of hope. Their voices intertwined, echoing through the town beyond the garage walls, reaching ears and hearts thirsty for light. Neighbors paused on their porches, children stopped their play, and strangers in passing cars slowed, drawn by the raw honesty of the music. It was a miracle born of kindness and courage, a melody that no one could ignore. As the final note lingered, Silas looked around at his family, the children who had become his world, the woman who had rewritten his story, the son whose laughter was a gift reborn. A tear traced a line down his cheek, not of sorrow, but of profound gratitude. "Together," he whispered, voice thick, "we are home." Eleanor smiled, her hand resting on his heart. "And this is only the beginning." The firelight flickered gently, shadows dancing on the walls, as outside the first stars blinked awake, silent witnesses to a new dawn rising. In that garage, filled with music and love, the family's song of hope was written, a song that would carry them forward forever.